Yeah, I know it's a little early, but I mean, even being in quarantine, I'm falling behind on a lot of stuff. So I really want to use the rest of today to scream into my pillow. I've been really falling behind on that. If you want to go get me started, though, go ahead and start it, and I'll be out there. 2, 3, 4. D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D D da ba di ta da si da fa. Hey, how's it going? Oh, I already lost one of the boards. My name is Jimmy. Oh, here we go. And here are some picks of the week. Da-da-da-da-da-da! Continuing off the theme from last week, this has been a good time for me to catch up on some books that I really liked but had to drop just because otherwise I'd be spending $200 a week on comics instead of $195. So, first in today's picks, we have Kickass, The New Girl, Volume 2. Sure, some of you are familiar with the film franchise of the same name. Is it a franchise if they only did 2? I think they were planning to do a third one, but the second one bombed or something. I don't know. To be quite honest with you, I've never actually seen those movies. Not for any real reason, but except that when I saw the trailer for the first movie, it looked so completely a panel-by-panel recreation of the comic book that I was like, oh, I don't need to see that. I really like the comic book. That's the thing, though, when people talk about loyalty to the source material, I go, yeah, but also that can be kind of dull. Like when Gus Van Sant remade Psycho. Great idea. I love cover songs and stuff like that. I've never watched it, though, because why? I could just watch Psycho. That's a dumb way to look at it, but that's how I'm looking at the Kick-Ass series anyway. Kick-Ass has become quite the franchise for Mark Millar, just comic book speaking. After the third Kick-Ass series, which definitely wasn't that good, and definitely did not need to be a movie, Dave Liszewski retired as Kick-Ass, and now this young lady is Kick-Ass, whose name eludes me at the moment. Hoops Lucero. Nope, that's the bad guy's name. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they wouldn't say her real name on the thing. She's got a secret identity. Rather than just being a teenage boy who reads too many superhero comics, Kick-Ass now is an Afghanistan war vet who has come home to find her family in a shambles because her brother has gotten involved with some drug lords. So she decides to continue the legacy of street vigilantism. It's a little different because she's actually well trained. And so there's a lot of super badass action sequences. Like in the first Kick-Ass series, you had Hit Girl and her dad to take care of that stuff. But now it's like they've kind of been combined into one for this. And it's really good stuff. I've been enjoying it so far. I don't remember if Steve Niles was writing the first arc, but I know the name. I'm having trouble. I don't want to damn him with faint praise because I enjoy his work, but now I can't remember. All right, fuck it. All right, sorry again for swearing. After that, I also have here Volume 2 of Guinean Falls. This is a book written by Jeff Lemire and drawn by Andrea Sorrentino, one of my favorite creative teams of the last several years. I've been a big fan of Jeff Lemire's pretty much since day one, since the Essex County trilogy came out. Jeez, was that like 10 years ago? No, it was like 12 years ago. Excuse me. And Andrea Sorrentino and he worked together on Green Arrow, like in 2013. A book that I wouldn't normally read, but I gave it a tumble because of Lemire. And then Sorrentino's art is so unbelievably killer that I couldn't resist. Now, this book is a little more action deficient than Green Arrow was, but it's still really good. It's if I remember from the first arc, which has been a couple years now, it's about homeless, or not a homeless guy, but, kind of a crazy guy who lives in squalor, and he just wanders the city picking up garbage, and he seems like a crazy dude. But then it turns out his vision of this haunted black barn is a real thing. And so it's very weird and creepy. It's really good, though. I'm very excited to get back into it. I only dropped it. This was like the last book I wanted to drop, but I ended up having to drop it anyway. So I could buy a Marvel series that's going to get canceled in 5 months. That's just how I work. And then finally, of my 3 trades of the week, I got Bitterroot Volume 1. This is a book I'd forgotten about, to my chagrin, but I have to keep copious notes of all the things I want and have. So I was happy to find this in there. And go, oh, right, I want this. Bitterroot is written by David F. Walker. It's drawn, I believe it's drawn by Chuck Brown and Sanford Green, whose names... Oh, you know what? That's what it is. Okay, I was trying to give it all more name. Unless I'm completely off, this is the same creative team that did the last Power Man and Iron Fist series for Marvel, which got canceled after 5 months or maybe a little bit longer, but was brilliant. I am always going to like Power Man and Iron Fist, especially together, especially when it's Luke Cage and Danny Rand. Walker has become one of my favorite authors over the last couple of years. He drew, the first thing I remember reading, he didn't draw, he's a writer. The first thing I remember reading by him was a Shaft series, a spinoff from the film franchise. Brilliant stuff. Even had a boxing story, which I am utterly sick of boxing stories, but it was still super good. He also wrote the Nighthawk series, the most recent Nighthawk series for Marvel Comics as well. And is that the only Marvel thing he's done? I don't know. That was another series that kind of got on the chopping block right away, but it was super good. So, yeah, I've enjoyed David F. Walker. He's got a couple other books that I can't think of right now, but I've enjoyed his work very much. I think Bitterroot started, again, right when I was bailing on that other comic book job and had to start paying money for comic books. What am I, savage? So this is probably going to be the first thing I read this coming week because I'm super stoked on it. And then, as following tradition so far, Bizarre Adventures number 28. Now, here's the thing that I've always liked about Marvel. You can't really read it too well. These are the unlikely heroes. This is another reason I like the Defenders so much, is because it's a superhero team that doesn't seem to make any sense. In fact, when I was reading the Sean Howe Marvel book, he mentioned the Champions and how that title was, the characters were completely disparate and thrown together, and the writers were like, what? We can't... But editorial was like, you need to have a strong guy, you need to have a horror hero, because we're pushing those titles. So, like, Hercules and Ghost Rider end up on the same team, and the result was apparently terrible. I thought it was great. I love when they do stuff like that. Having said that, I am extremely perplexed and very, very curious. Here you have Elektra. Here you have Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu. Here you have, I think, Danny Rand, the Iron Fist. And then, oh, of course, Triton from the Inhumans. What? That's an underwater guy. He shouldn't even be on the goddamn Inhumans. All right. I'm very excited to find out about that as well. I don't know when I'm going to get to those magazines. I keep buying them because I'm a nice man. I also took advantage of mail order. I am doing my part to support the United States Postal Service, a sentence I never thought I would say out loud. But given today's environment, I'm like, we need to start throwing more stamps around. So I ordered a few books for myself because why not, right? Firstly is a book that I've wanted for a very long time. This is Stephen King's Creepshow. This is a new printing. It's been out of print for some time. I probably would prefer to have an earlier pressing, but I'm not a pressing queen. This is drawn by Bernie Wrightson, the late Bernie Wrightson, who's a brilliant artist, original Swamp Thing artist. And the cover's by Jack Kamen, who was an artist for the EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt line, etc. Hence, Creepshow is the film was a tribute to those comic books specifically. Both Creepshows, in fact. I kind of prefer the second one. Is it a better movie? No. Do I like it more? Yeah. I think it's because it was one of the first scary movies I was able to watch all the way through without crying for my mommy. That's a true story. So I'm looking forward to that, even though it's been a while since I've seen the first Creepshow. But yeah. God, that cover is so good. And I remember seeing that at San Diego Comic-Con when I was in high school. I didn't even know that existed. I hadn't seen the movie, but I was like, oh man. And then I think my friend was going to try to steal it, and he might have succeeded because he was a lousy thief. I don't like him anymore. I also treated myself to this little book. I mentioned the Sean Howe Marvel book earlier. This is its DC counterpart, or so I would guess. This is called Comic Book Implosion, and it's about this, I don't know what you would call it. What do they call it in the synopses? Oh, right. So DC took an initiative in the 70s, in the late 70s. In the late 70s, comic book newsstand sales were just plummeting. Comic book stores were becoming a thing, but they hadn't become, a given yet. And so most comic book sales were still through newsstands, which they didn't even have where I lived as a kid. But, I'd still would buy them off the rack at like a bookstore or a grocery store. The first time I bought comic books was at a Thrifties. Anyway. So DC was like, why don't we do a line of books that are more expensive, which might scare off some consumers at first, but we'll make a higher quality so there'll be more competition for the magazines at newsstands. And it did not go well, apparently. I had never even heard of this, probably because it was a DC thing that I'm not as interested in. But as soon as I heard about this, I messaged my friend Frank, who had started collecting comics in the 70s. I was like, do you remember this? And he was like, oh, yeah, of course I do. So I was like, oh, I have to have this book. I am somewhat disappointed at how skinny it is. It's not as thick as, well, I mean, it is larger. It's published by TwoMorrows, which does the Alter Ego magazine that Roy Thomas, late of Marvel Comics, you know, he was the first editor-in-chief after Stan Lee. He's been doing this publishing, I want to say, for the last 30 years at least, right? I don't think he's written for Marvel since the 80s. Again, I'm getting all over the place. I'm looking forward to this because it's got a lot of illustrations and stuff, which is fine. It's a oral history, though, which is one of my favorite, formats for storytelling, especially. So I'm really looking forward to that. I don't know which one of these to read first, or of the other millions of comics I have out there. All right, so that was Picks of the Week. Where's the goddamn sign again? Oh, right where I left it. Hey, and then last week. All right. I did not get as much reading done last week as I had hoped, so I only have, it's going to sound silly when you see what I have. Firstly, I read Brian Michael Bendis' Fire. This was a lot of fun. This is also very clearly an early Bendis book. I don't want to damn him with faint praise. That's like the third time I've used that phrase this morning. No, I was talking to myself earlier. Okay, so, yeah. Before Brian Michael Bendis became more or less the architect of the Marvel Universe for the 21st century, he was an indie guy. He did this book. It's a lot of fun. The dialogue is very crackling like any Bendis dialogue would be. The art, I'll put it this way, Brian Michael Bendis draws like a writer. It's not bad. It's certainly better than I could do, but it's still not very good. Because better than I can do is, it's a low bar indeed. The funny thing about that is, and again, I'm not trying to disparage him. I highly recommend reading this book, especially because it's priced reasonably for as skinny as it is. Funny thing is, in this printing, he actually went back and fixed a lot of it. So apparently it was even worse in 1993 when it first came out. The story's a little ludicrous. It's similar to the Secret Service or whatever the hell they made the movie. What the hell is that movie? That James Bondy movie with Colin Firth? Shit. The comic book was called Secret Service, and the movie was called, or maybe I got it backwards. Maybe the movie was called Secret Service, and I'm forgetting. It doesn't matter. It's about a guy, some college kid who gets recruited by the CIA. The story is, it's not, the premise is, workable, but yeah, the story's a little silly. And the romantic subplot doesn't really work for me, and not in the way that romantic subplots don't usually. I still recommend it. It's very, very fun. You don't need to be a Bendis completist to own that, but it wouldn't hurt. And then, in the afternoon, I sat down and I read the Squadron Supreme Omnibus. Yeah, that's a very thick, that's a 1,000-page oversized hardcover. It took me a year to finish this. I bought this at the Long Beach Comic Fest in April of 2019. That was a big day. Granddad was very depressed and spent far too much money on comic books, but I've got that, and I also have a complete run of the Exiles and an almost complete run of the Ultimate X-Men, and other things to fill the hole in my life. This was a lot of fun. If you're not familiar with the Squadron Supreme, and I really wasn't even until, 10 some years ago, Squadron Supreme started as Squadron Sinister, and they were a direct analog to the Justice League of America. So the Avengers fought the Squadron Supreme. It was kind of Roy Thomas wanting to have the Avengers and the Justice League fight each other. And it's as fun as it sounds. But by the time so they would pop up, and then they became Squadron Supreme, so they were like good guys. They still would fight the Avengers a lot. And then in the mid-'80s, Mark Gruenwald gosh, I feel like Mark Gruenwald wrote what he and many others would consider to be his magnum opus, which is a 12-issue Squadron Supreme miniseries, maxi series, which all takes place on their alternate Earth. And it predates the Authority by many years, because the Squadron Supreme look around and they go, you know what? People are starving to death. There's wars. We're superpower beings. Let's force everyone to get along. Let's enact a utopia. And it goes very poorly, which is, kind of the point. I feel kind of bad because like I said, it's critically renowned. Mark Gruenwald, who passed away very, very young in the year of 93, is thought of as fun. And like I said, it's boring. It's not that fun to me. I really like what he's doing. I highly respect him tackling that subject, which had not been tackled in superhero comic books, certainly, up until that point. It's just that, as so often happens, there are a lot of superhero comics that end up being kind of political treatises. And I don't mean political like liberal versus conservative. I mean political in like, hey, let's show the inner workings of between these superpower beings, how they run things. Ta-Nehisi Coates' run on Black Panther is similar to this. Also not that interesting. I like Coates' run now that the Black Panther is in outer space, but the first year was a little rough. And that's what it's like, very Game of Thrones, or what I imagine Game of Thrones is like. I've never watched. It's kind of like The Wire, too, where you see all the inner workings of how all these things work. I like The Wire. I didn't like Squadron Supreme that much. Just thought I'd say all that. It does get like, I will say that I really, if nothing else, I really enjoy the earlier stories just because it's so much more clearly supposed to be an analog for the Justice League. As time marches on and those characters, fit into the Marvel Universe more, they become their own. They're no longer really analogs for the Justice League. So it's not as fun. It's still pretty fun. Anyway, I have gone on way too long. Are you going to... I thought I asked you to start screaming. Okay. That's fine. No, I'll do it. All right, you guys. I'll see you back here next week with what might actually be some new funny books. So, yeah. All right. I'll see you later. I mean, honestly, I'd rather do the screaming all myself anyway. It's not you. It's me. I like doing it.